In this video, I'm going to show you how to do a mummy, because how else do you think you got here? How does Phil do that all the time? We focus on the synthwave aesthetic on the channel for quite a few years, but in reality, it is just a particular set of colors. It is absolutely the best set of colors, but still, what we've actually been doing is breaking down color techniques, but because of the wild palette, it's easier to see each layer and step. But this time, we're going to take what we've learned and apply it to something a little more normal. And we went wild last week with the Phoenix Unleashed. We're going to kick off the bandage work with wet blending, but this is wet blending with a purpose. Well, at least more of a purpose than just setting gradients. Which we are still technically doing, but there is a different reason behind it. Color-wise, we're starting off with the darkness and grey castle. While that first coat of the darkness is still wet, we're going to come in with that grey castle and start pushing in some color. And this is going to have to be built up in a couple of layers, so you won't get it first time. This go around, we're going to be using wet blending to create contrast, but volumetrically. We go through volumetric highlighting on the channel all the time, so just think about a topographical map. The deepest, darkest are the lowest and the darkest, and then the highest peaks are going to be the brightest. But because we're laying it down on a shape where we want to create perspective and depth, we're going to be using the shadows in the back and pulling the highlights towards the front. This is going to give it some really dramatic curve. And we're doing all of this to create an atmosphere. But color choice does come into this as well. Most of the time when you think of a specific object, you think of it in a particular color, just like the bandages here. So when it comes to painting it, it makes sense that this would transfer over. For example, Superman's cape is red, so we use red, and your mum is bubblegum pink, so we use lube. But this color association also applies to emotion and perception, like red for anger, blue for cold, orange for dickhead. And this is why we started with the darkness, because we want that cold dark blue to represent cold and dark. And then of course grey castle is a little bit closer to the color we think of with old bandages. So we're using these colors to move through the temperature and emotion of our atmosphere into the color that we would perceive this object to be. And even though we're still in the very early stages, you can still kind of feel that. Before we get into this next part, I know that we've been having a few issues in the last few videos with how quiet some of the overdubbing has been, and I just wanted everybody to know that it's something that we're really trying hard to... Alright, change your pants, spray something for the smell, let's get back to it. Not gonna lie, that even caught me while I was editing. Even though we were working up to grey castle with that wet blending, we didn't actually get to a pure grey castle, so that's what we're going to start off with here to kind of get to our midtones and somewhat our highlights. And because it is the same color, it's also going to help us set our foundations towards our focus. Because yes, this is another idea that we're going to be bringing in. The human eye will naturally drift its focus towards the face. Unless you're watching Baywatch, and then I don't know what those people's faces look like. So using this idea of drawing focus, we want to push the attention towards the head. And because we came from some very cold dark shadows, as we highlight up, I want to start introducing some more warmth. And that's where the space dust comes in. And granted, there's actually not a lot in this mix. To be completely honest, I couldn't tell you the ratio of space dust to grey castle with this one, I was kind of just eyeballing it. But it's honestly not a lot. We don't want this to turn yellow, we just want a little bit of warmth and luminosity in there. And you can see the areas that I'm pushing this into is trying to push all the focus towards the face. Even though we're covering the thigh, we're still creating a gradient between the dark feet and shins pushing all the way up. And continuing that same idea with throwing ice yellow into the mix and mainly focusing towards the face and the very upper chest, this is also going to push that same idea. Essentially what we've done is create a gradient from dark to light, but as well as cold to warm. And already it's setting the scene and the atmosphere that the living mummy is coming out of the darkness and into a warm light. We're also pushing this idea by not highlighting the arm that's holding the staff to the same point as everything else, because it's further away. We've built up a lot of light, but we really need some readability between the details and the shadows to kind of contrast from that light. Otherwise, everything's very samey same. With the glaze of the darkness, we're going to come in and start defining the shapes by building up the shadows. With this step in particular, don't worry about the details, we're only worried about the shapes. While we want the contrast, we still don't want it to be a harsh line. So I am softly introducing the shadow a little further out into the light than I usually would. Alright, now we can start with the actual detailing. This step is actually going to pull in some major work for us. Separating all those strands of bandage is going to clean everything up while giving some definition to the model. Which is something that we really need here because wet blending on a model like this that has a whole bunch of texture is pretty damn messy. This is going to start to refine everything so it actually looks like we might know what we're doing. But detail separation doesn't have to just come from shadow. Adding a little bit more ice yellow into the grey castle, we're going to start to pick out some stronger highlight tones. And again, this is just creating definition. In the same way that you don't build highlights to an even level all the time, the same is said for shadows. Because the face is a lot lighter and brighter, the shadows have to be as well. Otherwise, it can be too heavy of a contrast. Even though we've already defined our shapes with the glaze of the darkness, I want to make the shadows a little bit more interesting, so I'm coming in with a glaze of diabolic plum. And this is a very, very light glaze. I only want a hint of purple here. If you go too heavy-handed here, it's gonna feel like you're starting to build towards an OSL, and that's not really what we want here. I don't know why, I don't know how, but I am a member of the Army Painter Factory team, so if you wanted to try anything that you've seen in today's video, head over to the Army Painter web store and use code HERESY5 at the checkout. And if you're in Australia, you can head over to in-games and use that same HERESY5 code for a little discount there too. There's links in the descriptions to both stores, the Patreon, and a merch store. And yeah, I know that ads in the middle of paint videos kind of suck, but at least I wasn't trying to sell you like a land titles in Scotland or anything. Let's dive into some creative backshots. When light bounces off of a coloured surface, that newly illuminated colour will reflect onto another surface. And even though the back of this model is going to be all in shadow, we still want to make it interesting. So for the base of our multicoloured undertones, we're going to get a little bit experimental. We're still running with the idea of volumetric highlighting through the way of topographical maps, but instead of going light to dark, we're going to be changing tones. Think a little bit more like heat vision. For the brighter tones, I started off with a very thin kind of dusting of space dust. This was just to pick out some of the more bold areas as well as giving us a base for some very light colours to go on. After that, I threw in some inner glow and then jumped into crystal blue. Again, stepping down in tones and colours instead of stepping down in brightness towards the valleys. But also, this is just a general idea. Don't feel like you have to get the placements perfect for this. You also don't really have to worry about how neat you're being or the details. Because just like when we were working with the shadows and in the wet blends, we're kind of creating shapes instead of details at this point. After that blue, we kept going down that tonal valley straight into Spellbound Fuchsia. You'll also notice that there is a very strong dark line between what we've got as the front where all the light is and what we're doing on the back. This is going to be our occlusion shadow. This is where some colours and light will meet and just cancel each other out, so you just basically get a black line. After kicking our greens with Eternal Hunt, I'm going to bring in Afterglow just to really kick off those highlights. If this were any kind of traditional anything, this would probably be your highest highlight. I don't have anything to say, I just need to split up the painting footage because that's what Ninjon does, and he's much better at this than I am. Now we're going to bring back in a glaze of the darkness to actually add some shadow. And just like before, I'm working more on creating shapes and silhouettes than actually doing anything else. So this will absolutely take a couple of layers. Because we're adding the darkness as basically a filter on top, all these pastelish colours are going to get a little muddy. Which is also kind of good for us because now they're kind of just insinuating that there's some colours or some tones there instead of just being this massive punch. And because I went a little bit heavy and treated it more like a wash instead of a glaze, it did start to fill in some of those recesses and tidy everything up. So that was kind of a plus. After that, I took a little bit of Grey Castle and the darkness to create that original bandage colour that we had for the front. And again, this is just to infer the colour of the bandages. We're not going to cover every single little bit of bandage with this colour, we're just again inferring that there's colour here. This is what's going to tie it all together to actually make it feel like it's one piece and not just painted completely differently from the front to the back. And since we do have a little bit of darkness falling into those recesses, this is also going to help with that detail separation that we're always after. I mixed in just a little bit more Grey Castle here just to punch up the highlights, but it is still nowhere near even a 50-50 mix. And then to tie it all back together, we came back in with a Diabolic Plum Glaze just to make those shadows interesting again. Yeah, I know, I have long hair. It's kind of weird. Here's where we have to play around with reality a little bit. In the real world, these bandages would have been a little bit warmer, a little bit dustier, kind of the same color as a parchment. But I didn't want to show you how to paint 3 shades of brown, because that's literally what everybody else does. But this little tunic butt flap kind of thing would actually have been white. It 100% definitely is white in the comics. But here's the issue, if we went to a straight white or even just close with an off-white, it was going to take all the attention away from what we've built up on the bandages when we're trying to push that focus towards the head. And we don't want that. That's literally just wasted all of our time. So instead, we're going back to that same idea that we had on the back, where we just want to infer that that is the color. Playing with lights, colors, hues, and contrast is just another way of tricking our brain into seeing something that isn't actually there. And it's actually kind of wild that our brain will read and register it as something else. So what I'm doing here to make it all tie in is using chromatic grays. Chromatic gray is what you get when you take a main color and mix it with its complementary color. They will just neutralize and cancel each other out. To do that, I started off with Terrestrial Titan, which is going to stand in as our purple, and then we took Temple Gate Teal, which is going to stand in for a green. And again, because they're complementary colors, they are just going to neutralize each other. For the highlights, I wanted to stick with that same idea, but I also wanted to bring in that feeling of cold that we'd set up. So instead of just adding white or just getting lighter as we go, I actually started to mix in some very light aqua tones. Because yes, it's still somewhere in the greens, but it also has a little bit of blue, so we're sticking with that cool feeling. And we just kept building on that feeling, getting lighter again. For the hoo-ha cover, of course, we were going to go with red, so I wanted to start here with Terrestrial Titan. Purple is a great shadow tone for red, and it also brings it back into what we did with the rest of the skirt and some of the glow that we have through the rest of the bandages. From here I started mixing in Flag Red. Now Flag Red is an incredibly punchy red, so it definitely needed some dialing back. But I wanted to keep the idea of the perception that this would be a very vivid red if it were in normal lighting conditions. And again, I am playing with focus here. I want everything to kind of point towards the center where that gem's going to be, so that's kind of where we're building our highlights towards. While this does kind of ignore a top-down lighting situation, it still pushes focus, and that's a little bit more important here. When painting, even if you're using real-world ideas, you kind of have to step outside of reality. There's usually only two trains of thought when it comes to highlighting red. You either lean into a yellow and go orange, or you mix in some white and you go to pink. But because we want to keep it cold and I already had some on my palette, I mixed in a little bit of Neptune Glow, which is again a very light turquoise. And now we're finally here. This model was all about creating an atmosphere and taking the skills that we already have, mixing it with a new idea or a new mentality and getting something that feels a little fresher. Take what you already know and do something weird. As always, a massive thank you to InGames, the Army Painter, and the best Patreon members in the world. Big love, you filthy heretics.